and Equitable Development Division at DSLBD. And at the Department of Small and Local Business Development, we are always so happy to be partnering with the great folks at the DC Bar Pro Bono Center. And I want to make sure that you get to this content right away. So I'm going to turn things over directly to Christine Kulumani, staff attorney from the DC Bar Pro Bono Center.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks to your whole team and the whole department. So today we're going to jump into, kind of going back to the basics for your small business that's operating and based in DC. Both some legal compliance, things that your business needs to do, some best practices, things that you should be doing, should have, as well as talking about some practicalities. So, when might making sure you're following these steps actually matter on a day-to-day? Not just, oh yes, I'm doing everything my business is supposed to. So let's think. When you want a DC grant, DC government contracts, federal contracts, want to participate in the SBA's 8A program, you want to get your CBE certification. You're trying to get a loan, sell your business, bring investors into your business. You need to make sure that, the bare minimum, the legally required steps have been taken, but also sometimes go above and beyond. Unfortunately, a lot of local small businesses and small businesses nationwide found out that maybe they didn't have all of the documents and weren't in compliance with what they needed over the past 2 years, applying for Paycheck Protection Program or Economic Injury Disaster Loan, applying for relief grants from the district government and private foundations. And so there's that practical perspective about getting money to keep your business going during this time and thinking about the longevity. Also, for the bare minimum legal requirements, if you are not meeting them, the foundation, it can be really expensive to fix. And there's the potential that some steps may be so expensive, difficult to overcome, that the business would need to shut down or really rethink what you're doing. So what is the foundation? The most bare minimum requirements that a business in the district needs to do, steps you need to take. So first, if you have a business, let's think and identify what's your business entity type. And there are some different options. Are you a sole proprietor? Sole proprietor is where the owner, the one owner, one only, and the business are legally the same. You haven't registered a business entity with DCRA. You have not formed a corporate entity. You and the business are one in every sense of the term. Do you have a partnership? This is 2 or more individuals agreeing formally and informally to do business together. Do you have an LLC? An LLC is formed by filing articles of organization with DCRA here in DC or the Secretary of State or similar office in different states. An LLC, as well as a corporation, the business entity itself is a separate legal person from the owner or owners. And that's important to know for liability purposes, as well as understanding the layout of your business, how it's viewed under the eyes of the law and the government. A corporation is formed by filing articles of incorporation, again with DCRA, with the Secretary of State, or if it's in another state, a similar agency. Do you have a different entity type? There aren't many others, but if you filed in another state, there could be. Also, under corporations, in DC, there are nonprofit corporations. There are also benefit corporations. And if you don't know what your entity type is, you feel like I'm not sure which one of these my business is, or my business isn't any of these, I would suggest that you speak with a lawyer, look through your paperwork so that you can figure it out. And this is your legal entity. This may or may not be related to how your business is taxed. And that's something else we're going to want to figure out and will be very important. So once you know what your entity is and the legal significance, if you're incorporated in DC, let's make sure that you keep up that entity with DCRA. You'll see on the screen right now a picture of the Corp Online portal. And on here, LLCs and corporations need to file a biennial report with DCRA. So April in the year after you've organized or incorporated, and every 2 years after. You must file that biennial report. Keep up with it. It is required for your entity to keep going. If you haven't filed, and it's one, and your status as an LLC or a corporation has lapsed, you may be able to file late, but you will have to pay a penalty. Once your business has not filed this form and your status has been revoked, in order to get the business back in good standing, which is required to do pretty much anything, you have to file the articles of reinstatement. And you're going to still need to go back to those reports that weren't filed. Another key component of making sure that you're keeping your entity up to date. Check if your registered agent is current in your account. This shouldn't just be done every 2 years. You should always make sure that your registered agent is up to date. This is where legal paperwork will go. If your business is sued, this is where that will go, where service of process will be, important notices. It is a physical address in the District of Columbia. If the registered agent was the business address, has your business moved? If it was a home address, have you moved? Make sure to keep this up to date. We talked about DC, but there's also something called foreign entity registration. If your LLC or corporation does business in states that aren't DC, so for example, Maryland or Virginia, do you have an office? Do you take on projects where you're physically there? Have you registered as a foreign entity there? Have you kept up with any of the filing requirements in those states? And if your business is incorporated somewhere other than DC and is operating and doing business in DC, has your business registered as a foreign entity here and kept up with your filings? Because if you're registered as a foreign entity in DC, you also have to file those biennial reports. If you're incorporated in Delaware, Wyoming, Maryland, Virginia, you're doing business in DC, you must register as a foreign entity and keep up with DCRA. And the following steps will also apply to you. Trade name. If your business is operating under a name that's different from your legal name, which is the name you use to register your LLC or corporation with DCRA, or if you're a sole proprietorship or a partnership, the name of the owners. Your trade name has to be registered and maintained with DCRA, again, every 2 years. It can cause some issues if your business is operating under a trade name, a DBA, a fictitious name. All of these mean the same thing, and it's not registered with DCRA. Having a valid trade name allows your business to hold itself out under that name. Use that on advertising, on checks, in agreements, wherever, and your business can have unlimited trade names. Is that a good idea or not? It will depend on your business, but it's possible, and you need to keep them up if you have a trade name and you are still actively using it. Also, Your business should have an employer identification number. This is a free identification number from the IRS. Signing up for this number does not magically make your business entity begin owing federal taxes. However, it's legally required for almost every business to get an employer identification number. If you have employees, if you owe certain types of federal taxes, if you have a corporation or are taxed as a corporation, you need an employer identification number. Even if you aren't legally required to have one for your business, sign up for one. It is free. It is also going to be required under many circumstances for your business to open a business bank account, which is very important, to keep your business and yourself as an individual separate. So your business should get one. Also, certain local and state taxes may require a business to have an employer identification number. Speaking of taxes, your business, if it has not already, and it should have, needs to register with the DC Office of Tax and Revenue for a DC tax account. You'll file Form FR 500 if you haven't already, and this is online only. This business tax registration is required even if your business receives what's called pass-through tax status, meaning that the profits and the losses of the business are not directly taxed, at least by the federal government, but are passed down respectively to the owners of the business to pay taxes on their personal income tax return. Even if that applies to you, you do still need to file for DC tax registration for your business. This process sets up all of the various tax accounts that your business may be liable for. These will depend on what your business is doing. Different things have different taxes. So a business may be subject to collecting and then remitting and filing sales tax returns. There may be corporate franchise tax, unincorporated franchise tax, different taxes associated with being located somewhere, certain goods and services, having employees. This is very important. And I'm going to keep hitting on clean hands. Your business needs to be up to date on taxes, have filed returns in order for you to have clean hands. We're going to come back to this in just a second. What's next? Your business almost unequivocally will need a DC basic business license. This is issued by DCRA again. It's typically valid for 2 or 4 years. In order to get your DC basic business license, you're going to need clean hands, meaning that you don't owe $100 or more to the DC government. And if you do, that you're on a valid payment plan and up to date on it. So if your business, owes some taxes to the Office of Tax and Revenue, like $700, or you haven't filed a sales tax return that's required, parking tickets, that's going to be hindrance to getting a basic business license. You're also going to have to show that your business is in good standing with DCRA, that you've kept up to date with your corporate filings. If you use a trade name, that's up to date. Your employer identification number, your tax registration, these steps we've just talked about. So, thinking, is your basic business license up to date? Has your business name changed? Have you moved? Does the category on your business license match up with what your business is actually doing? There are different basic business licenses depending on the activities that your business is undertaking. So for example, if you have a basic business license to do construction, but during the pandemic, maybe the business was impacted and now is also under the same entity doing some general consulting. Well, that general consulting is not going to fit under the same category. So you're going to want to make sure to go to DCRA and update that. The very few exceptions where a business does not need a basic business license are when the business activities themselves all fall under the scope of a license issued by another body. A doctor, a dentist, that then receives a license to practice that within the District of Columbia from DC Health, or a lawyer who is licensed by the DC Court of Appeals to practice law in DC. But if that doctor, that dentist, that lawyer, that other individual that has a local, state, or national license then goes and does anything outside of the scope of that, they're going to need to check, do I need a basic business license? So if lawyer Christine starts, my own business practicing law, okay, I'm licensed in DC, don't need a basic business license. But if I then add on pet sitting, that's not practicing law. I'm going to need to go and get a basic business license. So make sure that what your business is doing is up to date with your license. Them matching up really does matter. Also, going back to if your business has moved, when you have a basic business license, you're going to need to get a certificate of occupancy or home occupation permit. Make sure that, if your business has moved, that where you're operating out of right now has the proper document, because you're going to need that for your business license. Again, business bank account. No matter what your business entity type is, you need a separate business bank account. This is 1,000,000% required. You are an LLC, a corporation. And this is going to be for solely business purposes. It's not a piggy bank for the owner or the owners. Business money goes in, business money comes out. Everything is tracked. It is not, I went to Starbucks and I took money out of the account for that. And then I got a Christmas check for $20 from my grandma and I put it in the business bank account. Business purposes only, and it must be clear that this is a business bank account. Everything is separate from individual. You don't willy-nilly pay yourself, which we're going to talk about also, by just withdrawing however much money you feel like you need to pay your bills for the month. That cannot happen. Have a separate business bank account, treat it as a separate business bank account, even if you are the only owner of your business. Okay. So that's the bare minimum of what your business has to do. But in many circumstances, you are either going to need or strongly want various governance documents for your business. And these documents that I'm going to talk about, similar, but there are differences. And what they do is they cover how the business is structured, how it operates, and how the various owners interact with one another. And for these documents, it's again important to understand and identify what your business entity is. So, you have a partnership. You'll want a partnership agreement. It's not legally required, but your business needs to do it. It's not legally required to be in writing. Have it in writing. Having a verbal partnership agreement can cause lots of problems. Also, for lots of business purposes, this will have to be in writing anyway. If something is not addressed in a partnership agreement, DC law will set default rules that govern certain situations and scenarios. So a partnership will cover the management structure, the rights and duties and ownership interests of the partners. How are decisions made? Who makes what decisions? How much money or assets have each of the partners brought into the business? How are the profits and losses divvied up between the partners? What does it look like for a partner to leave the partnership or to bring new partners into the partnership? And how has the partnership changed? Similarly, we have the operating agreement. Doesn't have to be in writing, is not legally required. If you have one, you don't turn it into DCRA. Lots of business purposes, again, you may need one, and it will need to be in writing. Once again, if your operating agreement doesn't cover something, DC law does have default provisions, but there's a lot of different topics that you may want to address differently than the law does, and you have the flexibility for the most part to do that. These are very, very flexible documents. So an operating agreement will talk about ownership, management, roles, responsibilities, relationship, interactions. You can set out a fiscal year for the business. Again, the capital contribution, profit and loss allocation, which we think about money, filing taxes. We want to know how it's divvied up. Is the LLC, the business, member managed or manager managed, right? Who's running things day to day? Distributions, owners getting money out of the business, essentially paying themselves. How is the LLC going to be taxed? By default, this is generally what is going to be called a pass-through entity, which we talked about. But an LLC can choose to be taxed like a corporation. If the LLC wants to do that, it needs to be in the operating agreement. Intellectual property. Is intellectual property created by the LLC, owned by the LLC? Transferring ownership, bringing in new members, closing the business. Again, how to amend the business. The operating agreement. And corporate bylaws. These are a little different. If you have a corporation, these are mandatory. Your business has to have them. They're not filed with DCRA or with the government, generally as a legal matter when you form the business, but they're required. They cover how the business is structured and run, very similar to the past. The fiscal year, the number of shares, and if there are different classifications, transferring shares, annual meeting, other meetings, notices, dates, how the meetings are called, the board of directors and the officers, record keeping for the corporation, conflicts of interest, how to amend the corporate bylaws. But these are all similar documents in their purpose and what they can cover. But there might be times where even if you have one of these documents already, and if you don't, you need to, that you have to have certain language in there, or you have to address certain topics. An example is if your business is going to participate in the SBA 8A program, the eligible more than 50% owner of the business has to have a certain level of the ultimate decision-making authority for the business. That's not standard to be required in an operating agreement or a partnership agreement, but you might need to rework it in order to do that. And so make sure that when you're thinking forward for your business and you're setting plans, you're looking at these governing documents and seeing if they meet the needs of the business or if they need to be amended. And keep the documents up to date. Make sure that they reflect how things are done, day to day and big picture in the business if it's addressed. When there are certain requirements for what are in these documents, the requirements are not just that certain things are in there. The business is also actually doing that. And I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to make sure that they do reflect the business, right? For the most part, particularly with a small business, you have the flexibility to relatively easily amend them, to change them. And so, don't change it every 5 days or every month or even every year if not necessary, but keep up to date to make sure that it reflects what the business is doing and the business's needs. Okay, this is something that we have seen a ton over the past couple of years. How do you pay yourself as a business owner? Are you doing it right? And, if you're not, it might be tough in certain times to, show income or self-employment income, whether it's an employee or self-employment. So typically, if you're an owner-operator of a sole proprietorship, partnership, or an LLC, you will be what is called self-employed. And you are not an employee of the business. You are self-employed. The way that paying yourself works is that you will take a distribution or a draw from the business profits. The process for doing this, the frequency or the amount, and both, and any other details can be included in the partnership agreement or the operating agreement. So again, you will not get a regular typical paycheck as self-employed where your employer has withheld a certain amount of taxes and they have paid a certain amount of taxes. And you accrue leave and you have the rights of an employee. You are self-employed. You can structure taking distributions or draws from the business as meet your needs, and of course, if appropriate, with the other owners of your business. You will also need to pay self-employment taxes on these. So make sure that you are keeping up with this. Paying self-employment taxes, ensuring that if necessary, you're filing quarterly returns with the IRS. And one thing that's really important and timely, and I'm going to mention right now, is that if you're self-employed, you want to make sure that the process is proper, you're getting paid properly, you're tracking it properly, because in DC, if you're working in the district, self-employed individuals can affirmatively opt into and pay the tax for paid family leave. So if you are self-employed and you have not yet opted into DC paid family leave, from now through December 30th, you can do so online. You just need to establish that you are self-employed and you will then begin paying the taxes. This is something really unique, and some self-employed individuals don't know that they're eligible, or they may not know that they're self-employed. So explore if you're interested. If your business is a corporation, or if you are an LLC that has chosen to be taxed like a corporation, an owner-operator will pay themselves by drawing a reasonable salary as an employee of the business. This is going to be the traditional sense of, employee, how we think of being a worker at a business. That will be the case here. Also, if there are any dividends that are given out to the shareholders, that will also be income to the owner. No matter how you pay yourself as a small business owner, it is critical that there is some type of a paper trail to show, again, this is a recurring theme, a separation between the business and the owner. Checks written from the business bank account, electronic funds transfers, or deposits that are clearly from a business bank account to a personal bank account, not you taking out $700 as the owner from the business bank account at an ATM. as you need it. Make sure that no matter how you pay yourself, it's documented and it's clear that this is distinct pay as a worker at the business, whether self-employed or an employee. Okay. So now we're going to get into some of the documents that your business should have accessible, and probably backed up, hard copy, electronic, whatever works for you. And I just want to mention that these are sample documents. Depending on the nature of your business, you might need different documents, additional documents, and also depending on what you're needing them for. But this is, a good starting point. And there's just some different categories. So core documents that are going to be super duper important for your business. You're applying for grants, applying for loans, all of these different purposes. If you have a corporation or an LLC, you're going to want a copy of your articles of organization or incorporation. Also, your certificate of organization or incorporation, which is what you receive back after you have successfully organized or incorporated. Your trade name registration, foreign entity registration, a copy of your basic business license, a certificate of occupancy or home occupation permit, biennial report, partnership agreement, operating agreement, and corporate bylaws. And those, again, you want to have your current, up-to-date, but also past versions. If you're a corporation, stock certificates, board meeting minutes. If your business has registered copyrights or trademarks or patents, you want copies of those registrations. Also, a copy that is up to date of your business's business plan. Oftentimes, small businesses think that if you're already up and running, that you don't need a business plan. But frequently, you're going to encounter circumstances where you will need a business plan. And so having one that you keep relatively up to date and is accessible will be incredibly helpful. Save time, stress, headache in the future. Insurance. These documents, you're going to want to make sure you have current policies, you have past policies. If you can, do everything possible to get copies of the entire insurance policies. Some common policies for small businesses, this is not an exclusive list, are going to be general liability, commercial property, commercial auto, cyber coverage, workers' compensation. But again, depending on your individual business and your needs, you might have other insurance policies. And you're going to want to keep these, have them accessible, and look at, have any of your policies lapsed? That's a huge problem if you didn't make a payment, you don't have insurance coverage, and something happens. You want to know if that happens so you can get coverage again as soon as possible. Also, regularly assess, do you have proper coverage in amounts that are proper for your business, right? If you have a risk that has gone really down because your activities have changed and you're paying a ton for insurance for multi-million dollars in coverage and you don't need it anymore, you can look at your policies and assess and look at all of them and see how it fits together. Also, certain contracts that your business enters into in the future or has already entered into may require that you cover certain policies with minimum coverage amounts. Commercial leases typically require government contracts, even contracting with other parties for goods or services. There will be requirements that your business has certain insurance coverage. And while the other party may not check on it, you're still legally obligated to have it. Also, while we're in this category, you're going to want to check and think and look Does your business have any indemnity agreements? Everybody's favorite, finance and taxes, money. Have income tax returns. Depending, how the business is taxed, this may be business tax returns, it may be individual tax returns. There may be schedules, and it may be filings without any money due. But you want to make sure that for income taxes, both that payments were made for any amounts due, as well as the return itself. If your business is responsible for sales tax or other specialized taxes, have all of that documentation. Again, the return and the payments. Payroll taxes and any reports that are associated with them. Super duper important. Self-employment taxes. Again, and if you make estimated quarterly returns, have those. Payroll reports. Bank statements for the business. Receipts for business expenses. Profit and loss statement for your business. Balance sheet. Financial projections. A product inventory if you have products at certain regular intervals that are accepted in your industry and based on your size. All of these documents, well, one, taxes. If anybody ever questions that you didn't pay your taxes, because government really likes their tax money, you can show that it's ever brought into question. And for the rest, these different documents can show where your business financially is. It paints a picture of, the recent past, the present, and projections can show the future. Is, only a little money coming in and a ton of money coming out of your business? Is it seasonal? All of these different factors can impact different things that you may want to do with your business or need to do with your business. And so having these documents together, accessible, ready, and kind of getting in the habit will make things, once again, easier and less stressful. Contracts. So your business has probably entered into a lot of contracts. Even if you're relatively new and small, you may have some. A big contract is if your business has a physical location that is rented. You'll have a lease and amendments to the lease possibly. Make sure that you have copies of those. Not just the original lease, not just the amendments. Make sure you know where they are and you can access it. And while you're at it, take a peek. Do you understand your obligations under the lease? Who's responsible for what? Does your small business have to fix the roof if it breaks? Who does that? How much longer does your lease go for? Are there timelines for how and when you might need to do certain things? For example, if the business lease is up in 2022, under the lease, is it required that you submit notice in writing within a certain amount of time to your landlord that you want to renew? That's important to know. And again, thinking back to some of the past that we've talked about, is your business responsible for carrying certain insurance under the lease? The way you're going to know is looking at the lease and the amendments. Also, have copies of all active contracts. If it is going on, you want to make sure you have a copy. And of course, if there are changes or amendments. And again, do you understand your obligations as the business? What does the business have to do? What does the other party have to do? If you have independent contractor agreements, are the workers properly classified as independent contractors and not employees? If you have a contract to rent equipment, are you required to maintain that rented equipment? Is everything that you think should be in these contracts or that you have agreed with the other party to have be a part of the contract in writing? Is it in writing in the contract? It is in writing in an email? Trying to figure out how things fit together. Also, past contracts you will want to keep for a certain amount of time. It is really going to depend on the agreement and any different claims, right? Problems, lawsuits that could arise out of it. So it's going to really depend case by case on what the agreement is and the statute of limitations for anything that could come out of it. Also, employee-related documents, applications that are submitted, especially if you hired an employee. You want to make sure you have a copy of that application when they came to you. Job descriptions, not just the job description when someone was hired, but a current job description for when you're going to need it. I-9 forms for employees. And for certain employees, you're going to need to make sure that you get an updated I-9 as the time arises. Pay stubs for workers. Also, leave requests and leave balances. Something specific to DC. Notice of hire forms. And there might be quite a few of these. A notice of hire form is a document that employees working in the district must be provided by their employer when they're hired, when their rate or method of pay changes, and it provides information to the worker. This is really important. If you are an employer and you don't know what this is, I suggest that you navigate to the Pro Bono Center's resource site and read up on this, chat one-on-one with a lawyer, do what you need to do to get up to speed on the notice of hire forms so that you can get them to your workers as soon as possible. Okay, so I've said a lot of things. You probably don't have everything. It's really tough. You're freaking out. So now what do you do? I've said a lot of things. You don't know what applies to you. What do you need to do next? Okay, so first, take an assessment. Again, let's start from the very, very, very beginning. What's your business entity and what does your business do? Okay. Then you think, okay, what's the most bare minimum I need? Okay. What does your business have? What do you still need to meet the bare minimum requirements? What do you need to meet your goals? Do you expect a change coming soon for your business? That may impact what you need next. You're also, if you are not the only owner of your business, you're going to need to discuss with your co-owners what the next steps look like, what documents, who's going to do what, and some things will need the approval of other owners. Then make a plan and prioritize. So look at what you need, what is a must. The bare minimum, start there. So corporate registration, business license, and especially taxes, those all matter. Those are not only legal bare minimum requirements, but those are steps that can prevent your business from accessing, potential government funds and opportunities. So, those are probably priorities, but depending on what's next, is your business planning to try and attract investors, to get a loan, to apply for CBE certification, the SBA 8A program? And think about that when you make a plan and prioritize, again, the most bare minimum requirements, and then what is needed for your situation. This assessment doesn't have to be fancy and it doesn't have to be formal, but it will help make the process digestible, doable, and hopefully less overwhelming. What you can also do, ask for help. There is a ton of various help in different areas for small businesses in the district. So the DC Bar Pro Bono Center, where I work, provides brief legal advice to small businesses. You can speak one-on-one with a lawyer to review legal documents, discuss legal questions or issues for free for up to 60 minutes. You can request assistance online at probono.center/remote small biz clinic. It's also in the slides, so don't worry. Right, if you have legal questions, needs, trying to sort out your legal situation, that's a good starting point to ask for help. Also, for non-legal questions, the DC Small Business Development Center, fantastic resource. The DC Women's Business Center, another really amazing resource. Depending if your business has a physical location and where it is, your local Main Street can be amazing, hugely supportive in helping you figure out what you need, how to get it, connect with different resources. SCORE, a federal free mentoring program. The Latino Economic Development Center. And there are more resources. That is not an exhaustive list. Ask for help. Do an internet search. If you know other small business owners, feel free to reach out to them. Ask them where they have received help, what's worked for them. Or if there's a resource that can't help you, they may be able to direct you in the right way or make a referral. Okay. So if you would like to contact the Pro Bono Center, our nonprofit and small business legal assistance programs, our email address, our online resource site, which I mentioned, and our Twitter account. The online resource site, Law Help, has information, both written documents, guides, some podcasts, webinars on topics for both nonprofits and small businesses, on topic, everything from starting up, getting going, choosing what's right, to commercial leases, to keeping your business separate from you as the owner, protecting your business's intellectual property, employment law, employee or independent contractor. In addition, on there, we post upcoming webinars, trainings, legal clinics, and you can also navigate to that one-stop site to sign up for one-on-one brief legal advice for your nonprofit or small business. Okay. And I think with that, we are ready to turn to questions for about 10 to 12 minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christine. And if you haven't been paying attention to the chat or you're not able to see the chat, because I know we have a lot of call-in users, we have just sent a copy of the slides out because there were several requests for that. We will send that out again afterwards. For our call-in users, we're going to cover some of the questions that are in the chat, and then we'll turn to you in a few minutes to find out if you have any questions as well. But I'm just going to take things in order. The first question, Christine, actually goes back very early, and I think you'll know how to answer this question. Someone was asking about corporate status, and their question on corporate status was, what is a 501c3 a corporation?
So 501c3 is a certain type of tax designation for tax exempt organizations that they seek from the IRS. Generally speaking, if you are a nonprofit organization that has 501c3 exempt status, you will be a nonprofit corporation. So that is a type of corporation. However, you're going to want to think and look at your circumstance and your situation, because it is possible that you are not a corporation. So if you can, go back to your application for tax exempt status, the form 1023 or 1023EZ that you submitted to the IRS, and look and see what your entity is. You can also look at your employer identification number to see, and depending if your business is registered in DC with DCRA, you can go on that same Corp Online website and do a search for your business name to see what entity DCRA has you listed as. With that said, if this is a little confusing and you're not quite sure, go online to lawhelp.org/DC/NPSB and sign up for nonprofit office hours where you can talk with a nonprofit expert attorney who can help kind of walk you through figuring that out and next steps to know what your situation as a nonprofit is.
Christine, thank you for that. The next question, I'm going to add just a little bit to it because we get a lot of questions on this, and I'm also happy if it's helpful to have me add in any part of the answer, let me know. But someone has requested information about the business license itself, and we get a lot of questions on the business license often. Someone has said that they heard that you may not need a business license if your business makes under a certain amount of money, if it's a de minimis amount. I don't know if that's something that you're able to speak to, Christine, or just the number of people I'll tell you the other one that we've heard a lot. A lot of people have been hearing that if they're a home-based business, that they do not need to get a business license. We've been hearing similar things.
Okay, so if you are a home-based business, you are not automatically exempt from needing a basic business license unless you meet one of the other exemptions. So I mentioned that if you are licensed by another accrediting body and all of your business activities fall under that. You run a law practice out of your home, nursing out of your home. Okay, you might not need a basic business license. The other exemption for de minimis business activities is if the business activities occur 30 or fewer days a year and the business makes less than $2,500 a year. It's sort of like a lemonade stand exemption. I believe that is still the case. Kate, correct me if I am wrong.
That is our understanding as well. It is always good to check final with the licensing authorities at DCRA in case there are any differences, but that is our understanding of the most recent de minimis requirements.
And really, very few small businesses will fall under that de minimis exemption because it's not just the money trigger, but 30 or fewer days a year. And if you think about it, it really is, having a yard sale or doing a lemonade stand. It's not typically going to be what we think of as a business activity. It's really these very small, minimum, one-off type of activities. And having to get a basic business license, I do want to mention, is not necessarily a bad thing, right? It means that you are part of a group of individuals that have a certain type of basic business license and are in a certain category. And depending on your basic business license and what your business does, it may open more opportunities. A lot of things with DC, you're going to need a basic business license to apply to. So having it if you need it and understanding that ahead of time, great. You don't have to get it at the last minute, potentially pay fines and fees for not having had it, or trying to explain why you thought you were exempt when you very, very, very unlikely are not.
Thank you for that. I'll also just mention that as we covered a couple of weeks ago, we've heard from DCRA that some of the licensing categories are cheaper. So some of those basic business licensing fees have come down. I know that DCRA continues under its digital transformation. So if you are having troubles finding the links in order to get your business license, please feel free to reach out to us at inno.ed@dc.gov. We'll help you get to those most recent links. We've also put those into the chat today. But moving on to our next question, there was someone, Christine, who was hoping that you might be able to talk a little bit about small estate planning as it relates to a business or a single member LLC or a sole proprietor. Do you have any recommendations for someone who's looking for more resources regarding small estate planning?
I do not. Let me think about that, loop back, and we can send out after the fact any information, materials, or resources that would be beneficial on that. But off the top of my head, I don't have anything for that.
Okay, thank you for that. I will mention that someone asked about the site where somebody can find where self-employed individuals can register for their taxes. Christine, we shared mytax.dc.gov is the place that everyone should be registering locally. I don't know if there's anything additional you'd want to mention.
So for paid family leave, you will also need to register with the employee self-service portal. And let me see if I can pull up. If you go to I'll type it in the chat, essp.does.dc.gov, that will help you, that will take you to the portal where employers, which as a self-employed individual, you would fall under that category here, can go and sign on to get an account. Also, at the Pro Bono Center's resource site, Law Help, we do have a webinar and some resources on what you need to do to show that you are a self-employed individual for the purposes of paid family leave.
So I think the question that comes in right there, someone had just put this in, do you need to be registered as self-employed if you are under your LLC's payroll? How would that work?
That is going to depend. Are you on your LLC's payroll as an employee? Is that how is it structured as you as a owner operator, self-employed individual, just so happen to get your distributions on a regular basis? And if that's the case, then you are self-employed. If your LLC has chosen to be taxed as a corporation and you work for it, then under that circumstance, you would be an employee and you wouldn't need to worry about self-employment.
Thank you for that. There was one question in the chat that we had asked for some clarity, and I'll ask if that person wants to clarify now while I also move to unmute some of our call-in users. Someone who they're a startup corporation and they did have some questions about tax, but we weren't quite sure what that question was. If you have that question, if you could go ahead and clarify. And I'm sending our call-in users right now a request to unmute in case any of our call-in users have a question and want to ask.
Fantastic.
Well, it doesn't look like we are getting any more questions in. We'll see if anyone else comes through. But Christine, I know we have about 2 minutes left. We covered a lot of great information. We've already sent the slide deck out once. We're going to send it out again for those of you who might have registered just before the session. So that will still be coming. But any final thoughts? I know we really appreciate all of this information. It's a lot of information that people are often trying to share, and I really appreciate that the DC Bar Pro Bono Center also wanted to make sure to highlight it because we know that people have been facing a lot of challenges with this over the last couple of years.
Yeah, so, the one thing I, again, want to emphasize as we part, don't feel overwhelmed like you're in a hole that you can't get out of, and do not be afraid to ask for help. There is support out there to help your small business figure out what you need to do next and get the things together. So please, please, please don't be afraid. If you have legal questions or needs, to reach out to the Pro Bono Center for brief legal advice. Check out our website and also our other partners that provide technical assistance. Reach out to them, get the help you need, and take advantage of what is a really strong network of organizations, government agencies that are there to support you and help you succeed. Figure out what you need to do.
Well, we have one final question that came in, and you might actually be able to speak to this a little bit. And I'm gonna change up this question just a little bit, I think, to both answer it and maybe go a little bit broader. Someone is asking questions about filing as a foreign entity in the district and wondering if there are different fees depending on which state you had first registered at. And I was wondering, Christine, if you could also just talk a little bit about, we meet people who they decide to register in another state maybe to try to save costs, and they don't always realize that they then have to register here in DC as well. So I don't know if you could just talk about that just a little bit.
Yep. So if your business is registered, incorporated somewhere else, that's the legal home for the business. And then you come into DC and you register as a foreign entity. Every foreign entity in DC to DCRA pays the same fee. If you're doing business here, you pay that, and it is a fee for every business. And again, like you were saying, Kate, sometimes small businesses will incorporate or organize their LLC somewhere else, thinking, oh, I only have to file once at the beginning for a low fee. The upkeep isn't very often. It's relatively inexpensive. And that can be true. However, not all of the benefits to registering your business elsewhere and having its legal home somewhere else are financial. Not all of them are applicable to small businesses. Startup small businesses that are run out of DC, the DC area. And you do have to register as a foreign entity in DC. So you will have to pay the fee for that. And every 2 years, file and pay for your biennial report to keep yourself in good standing in DC. Also, you'll need to get a basic business license in DC. Again, paying money to DC. So not only could it potentially cost your business more money, and likely does, there's just kind of the practical upkeep of being a small business owner, probably a small business owner operator, keeping on top of the costs, the different registrations and filings, where do they go, when do they go there. And oftentimes, if your business really grows and wants to change their legal home, the jurisdiction of incorporation in the future, that is possible. Oftentimes you can do what's called domestication. So right now, while you're small and growing, and it's maybe just 1 or 2 or 5 people involved, keep it simple and easy in DC. And then in the future, if you're really big and you want access to some of the benefits that bigger businesses can get being registered elsewhere, you can figure out, you can talk with a lawyer and start going into the domestication process. But it's a lot to keep up with for somewhere else and DC, and it all relies on one another. So one forgotten step or missing link in the chain can bring everything down. And we don't want that for you. You don't want that for you.
Well, Christine, thank you so much. I know that we are over time, so I don't want to keep you any longer. I want to say thank you to my team for being on today to support. Thank you to you and to the DC Bar Pro Bono Center staff for all of the great work that you are doing to support DC small businesses. We will be sending out a copy of this, but we really appreciate it. And otherwise, happy holidays and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you all, and thank you, Kate, and your team.